Every wall tells a story. Every door hides a decision. Every inch of concrete, every shadow, every sound, designed with purpose. In the world of prisons, architects don't just build buildings. They build systems of control, places that shape human behavior, emotion, and even sanity. But here's the question nobody asks. Can a place built to confine also preserve humanity? This is the story of those who designed the invisible lines between punishment and torture. The architects of incarceration. From the humanist ideals of the 19th century to the brutal realities of modern supermaxes, we'll explore how philosophy, fear, and politics shape the spaces that decide who breaks and who survives. Stay to the end, because we'll uncover the confession of one real architect who said, "I didn't design a prison. I designed a machine to erase people." The birth of control. Before the walls grew high and the cells turned steel, prisons were born from an idea, not of cruelty, but of redemption. In the late 1700s, reformers like John Howard and Jeremy Bentham believed that architecture could change the soul. They imagined the penitentiary, a place where silence, reflection, and isolation could make criminals repent. It was called the panopticon, a perfect circle of surveillance, a place where visibility meant obedience. Bentham's design never became widespread, but its philosophy infected everything that followed. By the early 1800s, the U.S. had built its own temples of order: Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia and Auburn Prison in New York. At Eastern State, prisoners lived in total isolation. One inmate, one cell, one Bible. Guards walked the halls in felt slippers to preserve silence. No voices, no faces, just reflection. But what the architects didn't realize was that isolation doesn't reform the mind. It fractures it. The design that was meant to sew these souls began breaking them instead. Still, the model spread, because it worked on paper. Silence equaled order. Order equaled control. And so began the age of the prison architect. The age of hard walls and cold logic. By the 1950s, the optimism of early reform had vanished. Prisons weren't temples anymore. They were fortresses. The architects who built them worked under a new doctrine: security first, humanity second. Cells were made smaller, corridors straighter, doors thicker, glass replaced with steel. The new design language was industrial, not spiritual. Every window became a liability. Every blind corner, a potential ambush. In this world, the architect wasn't an artist. He was an engineer of obedience. After the Attica prison uprising in 1971, everything changed again. The public demanded safety, politicians demanded order, and the architects, they delivered both, at a cost. Maximum security became the default. Then came supermax. By the 1990s, facilities like ADX Florence emerged, designed not to rehabilitate, but to erase risk entirely. The blueprint was brutal in its precision. Cells measured 7 by 12 feet. Every surface was smooth, unbreakable. Furniture molded to the floor. A shower that runs on a timer. One architect who worked on ADX said privately, "We built it like a laboratory, to study the effects of total control." But as with Eastern State, the same question resurfaced. What happens when you design control so perfect, it no longer feels human? The ethical divide. Today, every prison architect faces the same impossible equation: security on one side, humanity on the other. Architect Ken Ricci, who designed over 40 correctional facilities, once said, "We design for fear, fear of escape, fear of chaos, fear of politics. But nobody asks what fear does to design." He described how clients, mostly state officials, never asked about light, airflow, or comfort. They asked about containment. How many cameras per unit? How fast can a door lock? How thick is the wall? The human cost is hidden in those specs. A cell with no natural light costs less. A corridor with no windows saves maintenance. An inmate with no view costs nothing. But architecture always speaks. And the message of most American prisons is simple. You are forgotten. Compare this with Europe, places like Halden Prison in Norway, where architects design with daylight, color, and sound in mind. The goal isn't punishment, it's reintegration. There, architects are taught that space shapes behavior, that a person treated like a human is more likely to return as one. In America, we call that luxury. But overseas, they call it logic. The contrast isn't just architectural, it's philosophical. It asks the question this entire documentary exists to explore. Can a cell have compassion? Blueprints of isolation. Every prison is a blueprint of intent. Every angle, sound, and shadow, a form of language. The architects of modern corrections design not for beauty, but for behavior. Their mission, to create an environment that controls emotion without ever raising a hand. The geometry of confinement is deliberate. Rectangular cells, narrow corridors, minimal symmetry. Humans crave pattern and variation. Prisons deny both. It's psychological conditioning in concrete. At ADX Florence, architects used repetition to blur identity. When every door looks the same, you forget where you are. When every sound echoes the same, time itself begins to dissolve. Even acoustics are weaponized. Concrete reflects sound. Steel amplifies it. Silence becomes oppressive, then disorienting. Designers learned that too much noise leads to chaos, but too little leads to madness. And so they found the sweet spot, a constant low hum of ventilation, mechanical whirs, faint echoes, a kind of artificial atmosphere engineered to keep the mind contained. The same goes for light. In Setso, supermax design, natural light is rationed like food. A sliver of sun at noon, cold fluorescence at night, no sunrise, no sunset, just perpetual gray. It keeps the circadian rhythm broken, a subtle way to disarm aggression. No day, no night, just compliance. Compare that with Norway's Halden Prison, where architects carefully balance sound, color, and space to maintain empathy. There, design isn't a weapon, it's therapy. But in the US, where overcrowding and punishment drive policy, architecture becomes anesthesia. It dulls the senses, quiets the soul, and turns human beings into blueprints. An ex-architect for the California Department of Corrections once described it bluntly. We don't design for people. We design for bodies that might become problems. Everything, even despair, is calculated. Walls are built to resist damage. Windows are angled to prevent self-harm. Mirrors are convex, so the guards see more than the inmate ever will. The air you breathe, the light that hits your skin, the sounds you hear, all are engineered to remind you, you're not in control. It's not always cruelty. Sometimes, architects justify it as safety. They say, we design for containment, not comfort. But between containment and cruelty lies a razor-thin line. And in many prisons, that line has already vanished. This is what they call environmental behavior management. But inmates call it something else. Living inside a soundproof grave. Because even silence, when designed right, can scream. The human architects. Most architects never meet the people who live in their designs. But in the prison world, that distance is deliberate. Designing a supermax isn't like designing a home, a school, or a hospital. It's designing a system that assumes the worst of human nature, every day, forever. One former architect from the Federal Bureau of Prisons admitted, "We were trained to design out empathy, to think in blueprints, not blood." Over time, some architects began to question the morality of their work. Was it ethical to design a place that guarantees isolation? Can a person create something knowing it might destroy someone's mind? In 2015, a group of architects published the Architects, Designers, Planners for Social Responsibility Declaration. It called for an end to designing supermax prisons altogether. Their statement read, "We will no longer participate in the design of spaces that deny basic human rights." It was the first time members of their profession publicly said no. No to solitary design. No to psychological control through architecture. No to being complicit in suffering. Not all agreed. Some said it was naive, that prisons will always need architects, so better to build safer ones than to refuse. Others called it an act of conscience, proof that even in design, humanity fights back. In the end, the question isn't about concrete or glass. It's about conscience. Because every wall an architect builds is a mirror. And one day, they have to look into it. Some never recover from what they've built. Others spend their lives trying to redesign redemption. But one thing is certain. The architecture of control always leaves a mark. On those who live inside it and those who create it. Designing the future. Reform or reinforcement. As we enter the 21st century, the prison system is facing a critical decision. Can we design a better prison? For decades, architects built spaces to contain, control, and isolate. But now, the conversation is changing. Architects, policymakers, and even inmates are starting to ask, can prisons be designed to rehabilitate? There's a new trend in correctional facility design, human-centered architecture. Instead of focusing solely on punishment, these designs attempt to create environments that foster healing, education, and community. Halden P. Risen in Norway is the pinnacle of this new vision, where inmates live in small, apartment-like units with natural light, wood accents, and spaces for meaningful interaction. Even in the most secure units, the philosophy is simple. Respect leads to respect. At Halden, inmates cook their meals together, take yoga classes, and engage in therapy sessions. There's even a recording studio where inmates can produce their own music. The idea? If people are treated like humans, they act like humans. But here in the US, we've taken a different path. While some states push for rehabilitation-focused design, the vast majority still cling to security-first policies. In places like ADX Florence, technology is used not to open doors, but to lock them more securely. Laser motion detectors, smart doors, real-time location tracking. The future of American prisons looks more like a digital fortress than a place for reform. These smart prisons combine AI with traditional security measures, allowing for constant monitoring. Every inmate's movements are tracked. Every behavior is recorded. It's the ultimate surveillance state. But while these advancements in security are undeniably effective, they raise an important question. Are we really making progress? Are we creating spaces for healing? Or are we reinforcing a cycle of punishment with new tools and new technology? The ethics of smart prisons. In theory, smart prisons should work. They're equipped with state-of-the-art systems that track, analyze, and predict inmate behavior with remarkable precision. But what happens when those systems stop being helpful and start being harmful? An inmate in solitary confinement might experience sensory deprivation. Without interaction with others, their mind begins to fray. But when a smart prison adds technology into the mix, offering a constant reminder that you're always being watched, it risks turning an already dehumanizing experience into something worse. The constant surveillance is said to make the prison safer, but it also makes the inmate hyper-aware, always anxious, always thinking 2 steps ahead to avoid punishment. When you design a prison to control minds, you risk losing sight of the humans behind them. Critics argue that the more technological control we introduce into prisons, the more we dehumanize inmates. Prisons might be safer, but they become psychological pressure cookers, squeezing out compassion and replacing it with paranoia. Technology that's designed for rehabilitation can often be used for punishment, especially when data becomes more important than the people it's tracking. Building a new kind of prison. The future of prison design doesn't have to be cold and unforgiving. What if we built spaces that didn't just contain bodies, but nurtured mental well-being? Designers like Michael S. Brown are leading a movement to change the way we think about correctional architecture. Instead of isolating people for decades, what if we designed spaces where inmates could interact constructively, where open spaces allowed for human contact and rehabilitation? This movement doesn't just focus on physical space. It emphasizes the psychological environment, making sure that inmates don't just have access to programs, but also a sense of autonomy and dignity. If a person is treated like an animal, they will act like one. But if you treat them like a person, they might just surprise you. The idea is simple. When you create a space where people feel seen, heard, and respected, their chances of reintegration skyrocket. This kind of design isn't just about making prisons safer. It's about creating safer communities outside the walls. But it's still a tough sell in a system built on retribution. In the U.S., punishment is the cornerstone of corrections. Rehabilitation. It's a secondary concern at BSATC. Despite all the research, the calls for change, and the ethical debates, real change is slow. Every new design has to contend with one hard question. Will it work? The architects who changed their minds. Behind every prison lies a set of human fingerprints, not from inmates, but from architects. They don't hold guns, they hold pencils. But their lines decide everything. How long sunlight touches a cell, how wide a corridor feels, and how much air a person gets to breathe. One of those architects was Thomas Beale, a mid-level designer for a firm contracted to help create parts of ADX Florence, the United States' most secure supermax prison. Beale, voiceover. We thought we were solving a problem. Too many violent incidents. Too many guards getting hurt. The goal was to make something unbreakable. But unbreakable means unlivable. For Beale, the project was career-defining. The dream of every young architect. A federal contract, cutting-edge security systems, national recognition. But as the years went on, and reports from ADX began surfacing, detailing inmates losing their sanity, smearing blood on walls, and begging for human contact, Beale stopped sleeping. In an interview years later, he said, "We never designed for cruelty, but cruelty was the byproduct of perfection." He wasn't alone. Other architects, some who designed solitary wings, some who built entire maximum security complexes, began questioning their legacy. In 2012, the closure of Tams Correctional Center in Illinois sent shockwaves through the architecture community. It had been designed as a model of safety, but by the end, it was synonymous with psychological torment. Former Tams architect Nancy Lurie, reflecting on its shutdown, said, "We designed to separate the dangerous from the rest, but we ended up separating the human from the soul." Her words inspired a generation of architects to re-examine what it means to design for security. Today, at universities like Berkeley and Cornell, architecture students study prison design not as an engineering challenge, but as an ethical crisis. They're taught about human psychology, trauma, and environmental stress, lessons their predecessors never received. And in that new generation lies a quiet revolution. These architects believe that design can't be neutral anymore, that every blueprint is a moral choice, They've started using design to advocate for justice, partnering with nonprofits to repurpose old jails into community centers, housing projects, and art spaces. The very walls that once held people captive now hold something else: hope. Still, the guilt never leaves those who built the original systems. Beale. Voiceover. I see my lines in those walls. I see the men inside, counting tiles, pacing 10,000 steps a day. And I wonder, if I'd drawn one more window, one more vent, would that have made a difference? When asked what he would do differently, his answer was simple: I'd design a door that opens both ways. For the architects who changed their minds, the question is no longer how to control people, but how to design for redemption. Because if architecture can crush the spirit, maybe it can help rebuild it too. And maybe, in that light, we'll finally see what prison design was always meant to ask. Can space heal what punishment can't? Building beyond bars, the future of redemption. The end of one kind of architecture may be the beginning of another. A future where design serves not just punishment, but prevention. Across America, old prisons are being reimagined as re-entry centers, vocational schools, and mental health facilities. Architects are helping lead that change. It's more than symbolism. It's evolution. Because the same materials that built walls can also build bridges, if used differently. Today's generation of restorative architects believe that the purpose of a building isn't just to protect society from people, but to prepare people to rejoin society. Light replaces shadows, purpose replaces punishment, and space becomes part of healing. As one architect wrote in her design thesis, the walls will remain. But what they mean, that's what we can change. For 2 centuries, architects built prisons to hold people in. But the next generation may build them to let humanity out. Because the true measure of design isn't in how well it confines, but in how much hope it leaves behind. Thanks for watching Behind Bars TV. If this documentary opened your eyes, hit the like button and subscribe for more real stories from inside the world's toughest prisons. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next episode.